So I didn't have the best perception of self. I knew I was smart and I just leaned into achievement, but I was grateful, right? And that's not to take away from him, but it's also to acknowledge that at 22, 23 years old, I was like, oh, wow, someone loves me. And we were best friends. And so that evolved. But almost 20 years later, I'm a different woman. I have done 20 years.
You shit now, baby.
Personal development.
Yes.
Well, you know, but it's not even the achievements anymore. It's the personal development. It's the therapy. It's the healing childhood trauma. It's the learning to forgive people who will never say I'm sorry. It's the being able to look at myself and be like, God made no mistakes in creating me. Like, I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be. It's looking at what I do every day and seeing that, like, your life has purpose. You were born with purpose, on purpose, for purpose. Like, you are called to impact other people. And then when I see my clients and I see what, like, I can create, even in all my flaws and imperfections, there is great things to be done. You start to love yourself on a different level. Like, you know what? I actually am really awesome, but also I'm allowed to evolve and to think that you should entertain and tolerate and be okay with things that you were okay with 18 years ago is crazy. That's wild, right? And I just got to this point, especially when I turned 40 in 2021. My life coach had me do an exercise. She said, do the willing to lose list. I'm like, what is the willing to lose? She said, it's not that you want to lose it, but you're willing to lose people, places, things, like, you know, whatever, in order to be all that you believe God has called you to be. And I had to be radically honest. See, a lot of times
you
we
put
don't
your
want to
husband
get
on that list.
I didn't at first because I didn't want to see it. So I didn't. But when she first explained the exercise,
you knew it.
It kind of dropped in my spirit, but I didn't want, of course, nobody gets married wanting to get divorced. Nobody gets married thinking that. I was envisioning picking up grandkids with this man one day, you know, like doing all the things. We going to the tape. We dying like Notebook, like together, holding hands. I had never envisioned it. But I had to be radically honest and ask myself a lot of questions about, are you really fulfilled? And do you actually feel like you're being loved the way that you now love yourself? And the answer was no. And he had learned to love me in brokenness, but didn't understand who I was as a more whole and complete woman. The type of love you gave me 10 years ago is not going to sustain who I am today. And I had to be honest about that. And I was honest. And if someone doesn't have the capacity to love you how you want to be loved, I think for me, I had to choose to love myself more than anyone and anything. And in loving myself to that extent, I couldn't settle for love that didn't serve me.
What was the conversation with your daughter like? Because Mini Maven is not Mini anymore.
Now.
Jesus. Yes, she is a whole little grown becoming a little grown woman. And you can't just make a decision like that, make a life change like that, the same way you could if she was 5.
Correct.
You know, so what were the conversations like? Because I think that's so important. Again, allowing her to learn through your lessons, but then also letting her keep that safe space with her daddy. So what were those conversations like?
It's so funny because he and I just talked about this on this past Sunday. We were talking about how blessed we are to have a daughter that can hold space for both of us. No matter what, she can love her mom and she can love her dad and respect us both. We don't talk ill of each other. Definitely not around her, but we're honest.
Definitely not around her.
Definitely not around her, you know, but we're honest about what we each need. And she gets to respect that it's okay. Like, it's okay for people to know what they need and accept that they're not getting it from their partner. Like, has nothing to do with her and our love for her. But I remember her telling me early on when we first separated, she's like, I think you and dad are going to be great co-parents. And I was like, you think so? And she was like, yeah, like, you guys are going to be great co-parents. Like, she, like, the whole time, I think because we approached it from, we're going to do this with dignity, she's just seen it as a process and not a problem. It's just kind of like, okay, this is what's happening. It's not to say she hasn't had her moments, right? And she has a small group at church that has supported her a lot and all those things. But she's been very accepting and very like, she told me one day, Mom, like, I love seeing you so happy.
She
and
can
like
see
so in love. And I did not think I was unhappy. If you would have asked me a few years ago, I would have never said, oh, I'm unhappy in my marriage. That wasn't it. But when I started to think about where my life could go and what it could be if I was loved the way I wanted to be loved, I had to be honest. And so it wasn't that it was terrible, he was an awful guy, and we were just fighting it. We weren't doing any of those things. It was, but there was an awakening for me, and I had to be honest about it.
Was he shocked since it wasn't, like y'all were it was always a problem? Or did he kind of see it coming?
He would say that he was shocked, but I don't think he really was. I don't think anyone wants to say I knew it was coming. We had conversations, and I'm very open, and I'm very clear. I'm a clear communicator, right? So it's not that I hadn't voiced certain things. I literally just don't believe he had the capacity. That's different than desire. I believe that he had the desire and not necessarily the capacity in the time frame that I was working with. And I had to just say, there's no prize in saying, oh, I was married for 40 years, but 25 of them I was unhappy. For
Facts.
what?
Facts.
And that's what many of our mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers did. We don't live in that time anymore, right? So I have a right to be happy, and I want to be happy and like fully express all of who I am all of the time. And so we had conversations. He still has said that he felt blindsided. And of course, that's to be expected, right? And a part of like a big lesson that I've learned is I owe him the dignity of his own process. When we first separated, because I wanted it to be so, amicable, I was like, we're going to talk every week. And we're going to flush out everything. We're not going to waste all our money on all these attorneys. People were like, it's going to take you 3 years with all the stuff you got. I was like, I do not receive that. We're going to do this with grace. We're going to do this amicably. And he went along with it. But I realized after several months that in his mind, he still thought there was a chance. He was being nice because he's like, oh, if I do what she says,
we'll just
like,
get back together.
we're going to get back together. And in my head, I was like really clear that was not an option. And we had some difficult conversations, and I had to just apologize just recently. I'm like, I was not trying to intentionally control anything, but I realized by carrying on that way and just like, hey, we're going to talk every week and we're going to do this and it's going to look like that I was being controlling, not from a like fear-based place, but it was control nonetheless. And it wasn't fair because he needed to grieve, and a part of his grief may have included not seeing her talking
a
to
true
me.
like cut,
a true like right. And so that was a big lesson. Like, give people the dignity of their process. Like,